Rise and follow Commissioner Owens in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, please.
Ready. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the Secretary please call roll?
Commissioner Owens,
Here.
Commissioner Frometta,
Present.
Commissioner Spathopoulos,
Here.
Vice Chair Duarte,
Present.
and Chair Dominguez.
Present. Will those in attendance please read the cover letter of the agenda as it outlines the procedures which the Commission will follow. This is time set aside for oral communications with the Planning Commission. Does any commissioner wish to express announcements or report on a conference or a meeting or request items for a future agenda? Commissioner?
No questions at this point, but I'm sure I'll have several.
And having said that, let me introduce you properly.
Thank you.
This is Mr. Spathos, Jimmy Spathos, our newest commissioner. Please let us know who you are, but in a few words, sir.
So legal name is Dimitrios Anastasios Spathopoulos. I go by Jimmy Spathos locally. That's how everyone knows me. I've been a resident here since about 9 years old, so without giving my age away, that's been a long time. Local broker here in town. I'm excited to be on this planning commission and serve the residents of this wonderful city. I've been here a long time, so I'm excited and looking forward to this. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Frometta.
No comments.
Commissioner Duarte.
None.
Commissioner Owens.
None. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I would like to say that this year, in discussion with Aldo, we're going to ask for the commissioners and the residents to come up to the committee and ask for education. So I think that something that's perhaps missed, lacking, or any other adjective is education for the lay public on who we are, what we do, and what can be done in a very communicative, non-hostile environment, open-ended questions, to which we will then ask the staff, as appropriate, to elucidate or to give us a frank presentation, whether that's from within the staff itself or from outside consultants. So this is going to be something new, something we're going to have trial and error, maybe very short, maybe lengthy, and that'll be determined by Aldo and the staff based on whatever questions we happen to have. So again, a very open, educational-based year. Okay? Okay, very good. Is the Director of Community Development aware of any presentation for tonight?
Yes, Chairman Dominguez, we have two presentations tonight, and I'll allow you to run through those two presentations that are on the agenda.
Thank you, sir. The first one gives me great pleasure. Well, let me rephrase that. That came off kind of wrong. Not because he's no longer present, but great pleasure in giving him a proclamation. How's that? I think you know who I'm talking about. Our honorable former commissioner and former chairman of the Planning Commission for 8 years, Mr. Matthias Flores. I'll sort of head off on this and everybody get a chance to take a whack at him. But when I first got here 2 years ago, I was looking for individuals who might be able to give me some insight. And actually, he gave me more than insight. He gave me a little bit of mentorship. And I think that that was very noble of him to do. Since I was sitting in a far seat not knowing what to do, certainly a foreigner in a foreign land with that feeling emanating every time. But the solid rock on all this was who has now become my friend, Mr. Flores. And it was because of his guidance, his wisdom through this, especially through my observation of his behavior, his thoughtful process, and his ability to articulate things that I did not see or provoke questions that I did not previously have. So it's a great honor that you're here tonight, and we've got something for you, as long as these other guys have something to say. So we'll go with former Chairman Patrick Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As well, Matthias, this is my fifth year, starting my fifth year, and when I joined the commission 4 years ago and you were already seated, I thought, this guy is, the age of my children. And I quickly learned and was very impressed, how you handled yourself professionally, as a member of this commission. And like the chairman had just memorialized, you taught me a few things too. And you took the time to drill down, took the time to, look at the issue in front of us. And I thought it was deserved, of the issue to do so. And so I started to concentrate and look at it, deeper and deeper and deeper. I wasn't stuck on paint or texture, neither were you, but it was about a benefit to the residents. That was my takeaway. And I wish you, success. I'm hopeful that you stay, in the mix in regards to leadership in this fine city, which, I've enjoyed. I'll give my age for 64 years. And, you represent the future, and I hope you're part of it. So thanks, Matthias.
Vice Chair Duarte.
All right. Yeah, I just want to, echo the thoughts that have been said. When we got on the board, especially me and Chair Dominguez, who came in, and, Mr. Flores showed us a lot of leadership. Kind of the same thing, we just kind of looked at his demeanor, his questioning, how he had to look at certain items. And, I think we both benefited greatly from that. During the time also, we became closer friends. He even got me into, soccer now that, I watch. But yeah, just, thanks Matthias, for everything. And like I said, hopefully, this is not goodbye. We see you around, you come out, and you're part of our city because we need you. So thanks, man.
Commissioner Fermetta.
Matthias, I've known you now for almost a year, and it's been a great pleasure in meeting and knowing you, and not saying that it's not the first or last day that we will be seeing each other, because you're very involved in the community, and I look forward to seeing you in the community. And I appreciate your 8 years of service that you provided under as a planning commissioner for our resident and for our beautiful city of Downey. Thank you. Your work and your time that you have given is very much appreciated by many. And echoing everyone here that with their comments and how they view you, it's should be a great pleasure and honor to hear all those great comments about you and who you are. So thank you for your time, for your service, and I look forward to growing our relationship and the friendship, and seeing you around the city. Thank you.
Commissioner Spathos.
So, Mr. Flores, we haven't really met formally, I think, about 10 minutes ago, but I'm sure, actually I know we have a lot of mutual friends and business associates and people in the city, so we haven't met, but we're somehow connected, right, through friends or family or whatever. So I've heard great things about you. I hope I can do as good of a job you did representing this city and the people of Downey. If you have any recommendations, tap me on the shoulder, let me know all the secrets so I can be well prepared for this exciting new opportunity. But good luck with whatever you do. I'm sure I'll see you around. Good luck.
So we're all going to come down now. We're going to present you this resolution number 19-3081 that hopefully expresses not just the diocese but the city staff and the residents' appreciation for all the time that you spent in preparation and actually being here and giving your heartfelt opinions and guidance to the city. So, gentlemen, join me down there, please.
you. Members of the audience, I promise I won't be long. I know it's going to be maybe a long night, so I'll be quick. Wow, so this is what it looks like from this side. It's a wonderful looking group. First, I just want to.
Set the timer.
I'll be brief. But first, I would have loved to serve for 8 years, but I was actually in it for 6 years. So I would take an extra 2 years, but I'm sure the new representative of District 4 is going to do a fantastic job. I came here I knew I was going to get a plaque. I thought it was going to be in and out. But I got a little more emotional than I thought I would be just hearing you guys out. And, aside from soccer, as it was mentioned, I'm not a terribly emotional person, and I feel my voice is about to crack. Mary, you've been amazing. Thank you very much. Big smile, so sweet all the time, so comforting. I appreciate it. Council, Ms. Garcia, thank you very much for always dealing with me and my questions and the patience. Staff, Aldo, Guillermo, everybody, thank you very much. Always so much patience. We have some new members of the staff. I'm sure you'll be great. You're in good hands. And Aldo, you've been amazing. Loved sitting next to you. You knew I always kicked and screamed when I didn't sit next to you. That's a good chair you're in right there. Aside from a good district, but that's a good chair as well. And then to my fellow commissioners, it's been a pleasure serving with you guys. I'm going to miss you guys serving here, but we're going to see each other around. And hope for the best, and thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Don't leave yet.
Are we ready for the update? Okay.
Yes, it's a resolution, so I believe we have to take action on it.
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
I move to accept the resolution as stated by the chair.
Second.
Okay.
The vote is open. Please place your votes. Okay, the motion passes. The motion passes 5-0 to adopt resolution 193081 for a resolution of appreciation for Matias Flores.
Better? Oh, there we go. Thanks. And if we can pull up that PowerPoint presentation, Mary, please. And so our next presentation, as I mentioned, is from our legal representative from BBK, the firm that provides us a lot of specialized support on numerous land use topics, and also tonight our cell tower topics. And so Gail's with us today. I'll let her introduce herself and work through the presentation.
Okay, I won't touch that. Good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Gail Karish. I'm a partner at Best & Krieger. I'm actually located in the Los Angeles office. I practice exclusively in telecommunications, and I do work, 99% of my work is for local governments. And so that involves a broad range of topics, but one of the topics that is most keeping us the most busy these days is really wireless and wireless deployments, and a lot of that has to do with something that everybody has in their pocket these days, smartphones that require that we use not only for traditional phone, calling someone or texting, but for a lot of data use for videos, for driving directions, all kinds of things like that. And that has spurred a huge demand in deployment of additional infrastructure to meet the demand for the use of cell phones and for other wireless devices, connected devices. And so I'm going to go through a very quick overview of the regulatory landscape from the perspective of a local government, how the state and the federal government have taken steps to limit your authority. So before I get into that, I'm going to just go through some of the basics of the technology so I'm not too geeky in the way I'm speaking about stuff and everyone knows what I'm talking about. Then I'll go through the federal laws, state laws, and then some very recent Federal Communications Commission orders that have really just gone into effect this year. And a little nod to what's happening in the future. So this is kind of a dense slide. I'm just giving you sort of a definition of the major types of wireless facilities. You have the things you see normally, the big cell towers, we call them macro cells, and they're covering a large area. They're usually quite tall and have big antennas on them. Small cells are what you hear about a lot more today, and that is not really any particular technology. It just means it has a smaller coverage area, and so it's typically in a location that's closer to users, such as in public rights-of-way. Distributed antenna system is a variation on a small cell. A small cell would be like a standalone. A distributed antenna system might have several antennas that are on different utility poles or streetlights, and they're all connected together and kind of operate together as their own little mini network that connects to the bigger network. So the basic components in all wireless facilities are what you see here: antennas, equipment that takes the wireless signal, translates it into something that can go over fiber usually, and that's the equipment. Then you have connecting cables, you have a support structure, whether it's a tower or a pole, utility pole, a rooftop, and you have a power source, and you have some sort of backhaul. So most of wireless is the spectrum itself is very expensive and is constrained in capacity, so the carriers try to get the wireless signal from your phone to an antenna and then off the wireless network as soon as they can. So that's where there's a lot of fiber and a lot of backhaul that is wireline that is involved in wireless deployments. These are just some examples of what you might see as a small cell or a distributed antenna system. The federal laws that impact your authority, most of them date back from the very beginning of when wireless networks were being constructed. So back in 1996, which was the last time that there was a major rewrite of federal communications law, there were a few laws that were enacted. Section 253, we call it, basically deals with placing some limits on local authority to regulate telecommunications facilities, and was really geared more towards wireline facilities or traditional telephone lines. Section 332C7 was one that deals more with wireless facilities. And then a more recent law was enacted in 2012 that deals with wireless applications where there's going to be a change in an existing wireless tower or base station. So you have an existing wireless facility and a carrier wants to add an antenna or replace an antenna or make some other modification. That was enacted in 2012, and if you fit within that box, if they can fit the standards developed by the FCC, in those types of applications must be approved by local governments. You have really no discretion. Section 332C7, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, it recognizes you have zoning authority, but it places certain procedural and substantive limits on your authority to regulate wireless facilities. So some of the things that it does, for example, again, it has an effective prohibition standard that you can't have regulations that would effectively prohibit the deployment of wireless facilities. You couldn't have a regulation in your city, for example, that said you can't have any wireless towers in this city, right? That might actually prevent a carrier from providing service, so that would be something they may claim would be an effective prohibition. Other things that Section 332C7 does is it says that if you get a request for a wireless facility, you have to act on that request within a reasonable period of time. And we'll see the FCC has spent a lot of time coming up with their own rules about what that means, what's a reasonable period of time within which to act. Another is that you must make a final decision. If you make a final decision to deny, it has to be in writing, and it has to be supported by substantial evidence in the written record. And there is case law that's developed to sort of define what does that mean. And then probably the one that comes up the most often for local governments, because people come out to hearings and are concerned about the safety of antenna installations, is that you cannot at a local level regulate based on what they say the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions, so long as the carrier is meeting the FCC standards. So the Federal Communications Commission is tasked with establishing what is a safe installation and the distance that people can be from that installation, whether they're workers. They have different standards for workers and for the general public. And all you can do really as a local government is ask the carrier to confirm that what they're proposing to install meets those FCC standards. You can't develop your own. So going to the reasonable period of time within which to act, that's where the FCC has been very active in trying to get local governments to act quickly. So in 2009 and in 2014, they established some what they call shot clocks, which are presumptively reasonable periods within which to act. So for co-location applications, where you're co-locating on an existing site, 90 days was the general rule they came up with, and 150 days for a new tower application where there's no wireless facilities already there. They did not really come up with a remedy for that. If you fail to meet the timeline, it usually means the carrier will go to court. There's no federal deemed granted remedy for those two. For Section 6409, that's the other one that was adopted in 2012, where you have to approve if it's a change in an existing facility. They came up with an even shorter shot clock, 60 days, but you have really no discretion. So it's 60 days to figure out, does this application have to be approved? And if you don't act within that period of time, there is a federal rule that will allow them to allow a carrier to seek a deemed granted remedy. So they can send you a letter and say you've missed the shot clock, my application is deemed granted, you should issue the permit. So the 2009 shot clocks have a few other little wrinkles in them. One is that you can toll the shot clock. So there's a kind of I call it a shot clock within the shot clock, right? So you get an application, if you respond, and this is mostly the staff having to worry about these issues, right? If you respond with an incompleteness notice within the first 30 days, that you can stop the shot clock. And then it doesn't start up again until they resubmit additional material in response. Then you have only 10 days, and then you can stop it again if they're still incomplete, and you can go on this cycle forever. You can also just agree with a carrier that we're going to toll the shot clock and we need more time to review the application. So I have a few cases that have established some of the standards, put a little bit more meat on the bones of some of those federal laws. For example, an effective prohibition, typically in the Ninth Circuit, you're looking at, these were cases that were established when the carriers were just building out their networks. So to say that you were effectively prohibiting service was a pretty high standard. They had to show that there was a significant gap in their coverage, basically, and that what they had proposed to install was just about as close as they could get to meeting your local standards for a deployment. And they had to look at alternatives and see if there were, that they had to do their homework and show their work. That was a standard that was established in the case law in the Ninth Circuit. You'll see as we come to the latest FCC order, they're trying to kind of do away with that, because now it's not so much about coverage, it's more about filling in need for capacity because there's so much demand. There's also other cases, for example, the RF emissions and property values. So one of the things is people learn that they can't come up to you and tell you, we're concerned about RF emissions, you should deny this. Sometimes they come up with other reasons, like this is going to affect our property values. And so a court, there's some case law to say, if you're looking at something like that, remember you have to be basing your decision on substantial evidence. It may be a situation where property values are sort of a cover for a concern about RF emissions and won't be considered a reasonable and substantial basis for a denial. Decisions have to be in writing, and the FCC, actually the Supreme Court clarified in a case in 2015 that your decision and your reasons for decision have to be essentially contemporaneously issued. And the reason for that is because the carrier has a right under federal law to appeal a final decision, and they have 30 days to decide whether they're going to appeal. And so the Supreme Court reasoned that they need not only the decision, but they need the reasons of the decision pretty much at the same time. And then in terms of what is substantial evidence that would be sufficient for a denial, it's kind of a test that's a reasonableness sort of test. So it's, as the court put it, more than a scintilla, but not necessarily a preponderance. So enough evidence that you can say that you've applied the local regulations and you substantially come to a decision that is supported by the evidence. Your evidence may support two different decisions. It doesn't mean it has to be just one decision could have been made. It could have been a yes, it could have been a no, but you have enough evidence in your record to support the decision that you took. So I'll go over some of the state laws. There hasn't been as much activity at the state level. There was an attempt to pass a bill that dealt with small wireless facilities last year, but that was vetoed by the governor. So the most important activity at the state level was really in 2006 and in 2015. In 2006, they established a process where you could get a discretionary permit that already considered that there might be additional facilities added to an existing wireless facility. So it's sort of pre-approved growth of the facility. And if you did that as a discretionary permit, then the subsequent additions that had already been sort of pre-approved would not be via discretionary permit. They also adopted at that time some limitations on what you could put in the conditions of approval. For example, you could not require an escrow deposit. You couldn't have a permit for less than 10 years unless you had substantial public safety or land use reasons. And you couldn't have a requirement that all facilities be located on sites owned by particular parties. And what they were getting at there was sometimes I think there was a tendency for local governments to say, well, you can only put it on like municipal property or something like that. The more important thing that happened at the state level was in 2015, where they adopted deemed granted remedies for those two FCC shot clocks that didn't have one at the federal level. And so now there is a concern, if you get an application in that doesn't get processed in time, the carrier can, under this new law, send a letter and say that you missed the shot clock deadline, my application should be deemed granted. And it really shifts the burden on the local government to go to court to say no, for whatever reason why they think the statute shouldn't apply, and go to court within 30 days of getting that letter. Okay, so there are other state laws that impact local authority, and that's not really in your area, that's in the public right-of-way. But just so that you know, there's like a different regime, different state laws that really affect wireless deployments in the public right-of-way. There is a state franchise that allows wireless and wireline, all telecom companies to place facilities in the public right-of-way. And their local governments can regulate that placement just to the level of looking at whether it incommodes the public use. And that can include a consideration of aesthetics as well. But that issue of whether you can consider aesthetics is actually before the California Supreme Court right now in a case that's pending T-Mobile in the city of San Francisco. Okay, so that's the situation today, and I know I've run through a lot. I'm going to go very quickly through this last part that is really talking about these 2 FCC orders that came out last year that are further limiting your authority. Most of what they're doing is really targeted at installations that are small wireless facilities in the public right-of-way, but some of it actually does impact local zoning authority as well. So there were 2 orders that were issued. One said that you can't have any kind of moratorium on deployments, and that includes a de facto moratorium. So you can't do things as a city that would discourage applicants from submitting applications. The second is what we call the small cell order, and that has 2 major components. One is they've set up a whole new regulatory regime of new shot clocks and shorter shot clocks and other standards that apply for what they've defined as small wireless facilities. And so if an applicant comes with a small wireless facility, meets that definition that's basically a height and kind of size definition, then they're under a whole different regime. They have shorter shot clocks, they have all kinds of other regulation placed on local governments. But then the other thing that it did was it clarified some of these existing longer shot clocks. One of the things they did is they said that all of these shot clocks, when we talk about the time period within which to act, we mean all of the permits and authorizations that are required. Not just the one that you'd get from the Planning Commission, but the building permit, the electrical permit, all of them. So that shortens the shot clocks tremendously because it requires a lot more work to be done in the same already pretty short period. Another thing they clarified is you can't require a pre-application meeting. That's often a very helpful thing to have to make sure the applicant sort of has things in order. If you require it, then that's when the shot clock starts. Another thing that they've done is they've clarified what they mean by co-locations. So a co-location, traditionally we think of it, you already have a wireless facility there and you're adding an antenna, and we think of that as a co-location. The FCC said no. Now, what we mean by co-location, if it's one of those eligible facilities requests, those ones that you have to approve, yes, that's what we mean, is an existing wireless tower. But for all other situations, a co-location just means you're going to attach an antenna to an existing structure. So there's a building there, and you want to put a wireless facility on the roof, that's a co-location. So that means in that instance it would be a 90-day shot clock to review and decide. This is the definition of a small wireless facility. And the rest of the presentation is really on these other rules that apply just to small wireless facilities. And they're not limited to the public right-of-way. It can also be in a park or on a building, so they may come before you as well. The 2 new shorter shot clocks are 60 days for a co-location and 90 for a new facility. The new rules on how to determine whether an application is complete is now local governments have 10 days rather than 30 to determine whether it's complete. And when you resubmit, the shot clock starts at 0. They've made some changes to the standard that you would look at and whether there was an effective prohibition to try and ease the standard for local governments, so it, for industry, so it wouldn't have to show a significant gap in your coverage. It could be just that you're trying to put more facilities in because you need more capacity, things like that. also required that certain types, certain aesthetic if you're going to have aesthetic standards, they have to be objective and reasonable and no more burdensome than another infrastructure. Taken a hit also on fees, so they're trying to limit the fees that can be charged. They've also looked at ways to get at allowing the industry to use your infrastructure as a city on a regulated rate. So now they have a presumptively reasonable charge that you can charge for use of a city streetlight, for example, to place a wireless facility. They're said more about spacing requirements. So if you want for aesthetic reasons to, keep facilities, a certain distance apart, they've taken a run at that as well and said, well, that might be reasonable, but maybe that would be an effective prohibition if you didn't allow carriers to use all existing infrastructure, and on and on. So those latest two orders are on appeal. Our firm represents one of the largest groups that is appealing. It's more than 50 cities and a number of national or regional associations, and that appeal will be heard in the Ninth Circuit. But for now, that order is in effect, and all the other shot clocks and everything that I've talked about. So I've thrown a lot at you very quickly. I'm happy to take any questions you may have for me. Oh, and I didn't tell you about future. So the future is more wireless. And mostly in the public right-of-way, and that's driven by you hear 5G, you hear about connected cars, Internet of Things, all of that is just means more deployment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Outstanding presentation, a lot more than what I'd envisioned. We're going to start now by asking questions of Ms. Karish. If I could ask Commissioner Spathos to ask questions.
I have a couple of questions in regards to, so it looks like they've explained everything we can't do as a planning commission. My question as to what we can do as a planning commission, there is spacing requirements, but it doesn't specify what are the spacing requirements.
Right.
Is there a number? Do we know what the spacing requirements are?
No. So the FCC, so you start with the premise that you have authority to regulate development in your community. And all that the FCC in particular is doing is in their very limited world as a federal agency that can, interpret and come up with rules under their own authority. They look for ways, to be very kind of direct about it, they look for ways to preempt your local authority. So that's why everything is kind of phrased in a negative. Where they don't preempt you, you have your normal full authority unless the state has acted in some way.
So is it, if they determine that 100 yards is feasible and works, they're allowed to build cell phone towers within 100 yards, for example?
Well, what would come up is, for example, if you established a spacing requirement, it's part of your own regulation.
As a city?
Yeah, and then a carrier might challenge whether that is creating an effective prohibition of their ability to provide service by saying that, it's not allowing us to put up facilities where we need to for this or that reason. So it's not, they don't regulate in terms of really setting the rules, they just give the indication of what might be problematic, and then it's a matter of the carriers actually trying to, either persuade the city to change their law because they think it's going to be an effective prohibition, or just suing them over a particular denial, or in the case of the city of San Francisco, they were sued because the carriers thought their whole ordinance was invalid.
So I think you answered my second question. which is, as a city, do we have some type of aesthetic plan when it comes to cell phone towers? Or is that?
Well, on the macro sites, we've worked closely with our planning staff, mostly on distance from the surrounding uses, and then trying to camouflage those antennas as best we can. And so I'm going to ask for assistance from our city attorney. I know as we start to roll out and try to deal with what's happening on our right-of-way, that we'll be working on an ordinance that may or may not address those aesthetic concerns if we've got the ability to do so under the law.
Yes, in fact, Ms. Karish is assisting us with regulations that we can lawfully and legally adopt for those facilities in your public right-of-way. So we actually are working on it now. I think there's a deadline of mid-April to get this ordinance in place.
Yeah, the small wireless facilities, that FCC order that I was talking about, it went into effect in terms of the shot clocks and the limitations on fees and things like that. It went into effect on January 14th, but the portion that deals with having to have objective design standards and all of that, those aesthetic standards requirements don't go into effect until April 15th.
I have a question somewhat related to that answer as well. So I'm a property owner, and a wireless company approaches me as a tenant or a leasee. We're looking at that aspect of it as well. You know, even outside of the city-owned property or public right-of-way, we're also looking to condition or to.
We do have some existing zoning laws in place already that would touch upon that particular circumstance. Mm-hmm. I've actually asked Ms. Karish to look at those as well to figure out or determine whether we need to make any changes in that area as well. So yes, we have some in place now. There may be some amendments we may need to make on the zoning side for that particular chapter. And of course, when we do that, it will come here.
Okay, so it's my impression based on this excellent report that, you know, because of our voracious appetite for RF, you know, we're at pretty much a mercy. You know, we're not empowered, you know, too much, you know, but that's something that I think each one of us, as well as city staff and council, you know, will help guide the city, you know, to keep things as best, you know, in a controlled state.
And when we say we mean every city in the state of California and maybe the United States.
Yeah.
And on that, just again, not related to Downey because we're incorporated, but so County of Los Angeles, unincorporated areas, a carrier wanted to plunk a tower. Could a city not restrict, but sort of guide, you know, things to turn into more fiber with smaller, you know, like you had pointed out, you know, smaller nodes or smaller, you know, distributed means instead of, you know, 50-foot, 100-foot towers that don't ever look like palm trees or pine trees.
Right, exactly. We see those all the time, right? So you can't really design the network for the carriers. So where they are today, they have pretty well maxed out their overall coverage with macro towers. It's not that you won't see new ones. You still see new ones come up from time to time, and they still, you know, put new facilities on existing towers. But where they're most focused now is on increasing capacity and sort of using that spectrum, you know, getting more antennas closer to users. And that usually means more small cells, and that's why they've had such a focus now on trying to get regulation out of the Federal Communications Commission to make it easier for them to deploy within the public right-of-way. But one thing that I think is important to remember is that it's not just our cell phone demand that is creating this demand. I mean, there are everything we talk about today is you know, has some sort of wireless component to it. There's wireless meter reading. You know, we have smart meters. There's we're talking about connected cars. We don't just have cell phones. We have, Apple Watches and all of these other things.
All the things that are in the future trends part of your
Yeah.
presentation, Internet of Things.
All of that, and actually the spectrum that they're using today is have done a lot to try and maximize the use of those networks, but they're going to be moving to new spectrum, and that's where 5G comes from. A lot of it is new spectrum that has different characteristics. So it's actually like a much bigger pipe. It can take in a lot more data, but it can't travel very far. And so that's another reason why they need to be smaller facilities closer.
Amplified.
It has to get off of the air and into fiber as soon as possible. So that's another thing that's really driving the deployments in the public right of way.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fermetta.
No, well, my question was answered, which was on the aesthetics. Thank you for the presentation.
Oh, you're welcome.
Commissioner Doherty.
Yeah, just briefly. First thing I'm taking back just how recent this case law is. I'm actually arguing 2 motions in court tomorrow on Friday, and I have case law from like 40 years ago. So it's just kind of neat to see. The only question I had was the distinction between the shot clocks on the 90, 150 days on the 332 C7, and why is there no remedy there, and what's the distinction between the section 6409A? Yeah,
so that was interesting because the carriers have asked numerous times to be, for the FCC to come up with a deemed granted remedy under their authority, and the FCC reasoned that they didn't have that authority under Section 332 because there is a remedy, you can go to court. But with the Section 6409, the law that was passed in 2012, they felt that they could have imposed that deemed granted remedy because the statute itself said that these applications that are for, that they called eligible facilities requests, modifications to existing wireless facilities, had to be approved. You don't have any discretion at a local level, so they felt like if they created a shot clock, they had the authority under the statute to say that there would be a deemed granted remedy if it wasn't approved.
Thank you.
Wow, this is pretty alarming. What I take out of this is what you already said. We cannot make an argument from the diocese for any radio frequency health issues, period. Correct? What appears to, we do have some leeway on from the property owners is to have arguments that are valid and substantiated by decreasing in property values. So that would be a case for homeowners to come up in opposition of having any towers in their domain. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, but usually those would have to be tied to something.
Yes.
Did the battery go out?
Oh,
Okay.
I'm back.
Thank you. Could you repeat what you started saying, please?
Yeah, so really you'd have to, just to come and say, so the case law on property values has really kind of discouraged just anecdotal information about, an impact on property values and look more towards if there would be kind of professional reports or things from like a real estate agent or something that could make some kind of a report that seemed meaningful to be able to rely on property values. And usually it's tied to aesthetics, so you're really back at aesthetics again. I'm trying to fix it.
You're there.
On? No. Yeah, there.
That's one of the batteries.
Testing.
Sorry about the inconvenience.
Oh, not a. Oh, is it this one on?
You're live.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a little bit skeptical about the sort of being successful at denying an application solely based on property value, impacts on property values, because usually there isn't a lot of good evidence. The carriers will, where this issue has come up, carriers will bring out some report from somewhere showing, no, people like to have good service, and then so this doesn't have an impact, and then you'll have some people saying, yes, it will have an impact. Usually there's not a lot of good evidence to support that. I think where cities have been more successful in denying applications has been where they have very clear aesthetic standards and the standards can't be met. And that's where you may still end up with the carrier saying that that's an effective prohibition or suing the city, but where you have good aesthetic standards and that seems to be where the strongest sort of rooting of a well-founded, sustainable denial would come from.
And that applies to the macro and the small cells?
Yeah, and so one of the things that one of the things that the FCC has done in this small cell order is try to place some limits for the first time on what would be an appropriate aesthetic standard. And so that was the slide that I kind of ran through pretty quick, but where they're saying, so for small wireless facilities, they're going to have to be, the aesthetic standards are going to have to be reasonable, no more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure, but they don't define infrastructure, so we think maybe they mean, we don't know what they mean exactly, maybe electric. Usually what the carriers point to is they say, well, you have a utility pole and it's got a big, it's got equipment on it, so we should be able to put up an antenna and equipment too. And another is that it has to be objective. And that, aesthetics are typically pretty subjective. So objective would be things like paint it brown as opposed to paint it to match the, other things around it, that kind of thing. And published in advance. You have to have clear standards published in advance. So the concept from the FCC's perspective is that the applicant can come in, read your standards, and know what to apply for that would be approved.
Can we mandate that the carriers use established or existing poles or macro towers, especially when they come in, they want to establish something on the right-of-way?
So that is, you can set preferences. How far you can take that is now really subject to some question because of these recent FCC orders that would say, it goes back to something like the spacing requirements where they're saying, well, you could have spacing requirements, maybe that would be reasonable, but not if it would mean, for example, they say, not if you could provider from replacing pre-existing facilities or co-locating new equipment on a structure already in use. So if there's a existing utility pole and you're saying you've got to go use something else, they may say, well, that doesn't seem like that passes muster under this FCC order.
Flip it. Now they want to set up a new pole, but we're saying no, use that pole.
Yeah, where they want to put in new infrastructure, like they want to put up a new standalone pole just for their antenna, I think that's where you have probably the strongest authority because it's not only aesthetics you're worried about. Most cities don't want additional clutter and additional things that might get hit by a car or block, a sidewalk in the public right-of-way. So I think you have a stronger basis, and that's usually, and it's a very common thread that I see in working with cities all over, is that they really don't want new structures placed in the right-of-way where they can avoid it.
And if the argument is we're trying to decrease the amount of drop calls or lack of service, who makes that determination? Is it actually the company, or is there some FTC guideline?
There is no FCC guideline, and they don't even have to say it's drop calls anymore. They can just be saying, under, at least with small wireless facilities, they can be saying we need to, additional capacity in our network. We want to introduce new services. They've got all sorts of things they might say. But that is one of the things where I think is the weakest in terms of regulation overall, is there is no regulation of service standards really of wireless carriers. It's regulated through competition. The price and the service quality is regulated through competition. So they design their own networks. They establish their own standards for how well they want them to work.
So since we have some major arteries in the city, Florence, Firestone, Imperial, Lakewood, etc., theoretically we could have just the major arteries, just each corner blanketed by a different carrier, and no empowerment by the city to limit the number or have them share poles, facilities otherwise?
It could be difficult to limit. Certainly, you can have aesthetic regulation, and you can. There aren't clear answers in this FCC ruling. They deal with very broad issues in a paragraph or two, right? Like the spacing requirement. They say, yeah, that might be fine. Have a spacing requirement to reduce clutter, but we wouldn't see that. Probably wouldn't be okay if it meant you couldn't use existing structures. Right, so, what does that mean exactly, right? So we're all just struggling with figuring out how to implement or come up with standards that work for the cities and meet the FCC's guidance, but we don't have, this order. The portion on aesthetics hasn't even gone into effect. We don't really have, we have no case law on this. We're challenging the validity of the order. We don't know where this will end up. So we're all just figuring it out right now based on what we have before us and the arguments we have with the carriers about what's acceptable and what's not.
In regards to placement of tower, macrocells, etc., near parks and or schools, I understand the restriction on using RF. Is that restriction applicable to a single tower, single macro cell, a single carrier, or can we use cumulative RF by multiple cells on that singular tower? In other words, if ABC puts up a tower next to a school and or park, and they've got one emitting RF cell, and they add two, is that now a cumulative additive effect that we can use, or does it still count as just one tower?
So when you when a city asks an applicant to demonstrate that they meet the FCC standards, they hire consultants that do a report, and they do look at the cumulative impact in the report, and that's something that is important to review, especially when we're getting more and more dense antennas where there will be cumulative impacts potentially. Up and down street. So that is something they do in their reporting, and sometimes the reports also include mitigation measures. Like, if you're going to put, I saw one the other day, it was talking about a rooftop facility, and it said you can place it and it will be within the safe parameters, but you should lock the rooftop hatch because that would be an exposure. You should paint blue paint to show where people shouldn't go on the roof if they're up there fixing the air conditioning or something like that. So they usually, the good reports will have things like that, and we'll deal with the cumulative impacts.
Is RF a linear projection or is it sort of a Y shape? Is that
It bows out.
bows out? Okay. So when we have these companies coming and asking to place them near the schools and or in parks, are we asking for that cumulative RF evaluation as part of their application?
Dave, do we get that for the macros? Because we don't get a lot that come in. We've done one since I've been here in my 5 years, and that's one at the Discovery Park. We have the second one that was approved by the Planning Commission a few months ago, and that's going to go on the Public Works facility. But do we collect that information, Dave, during the entitlement process?
We actually don't collect that information. One of the issues we have with our, and I wouldn't say an issue with our code, but because there's so many regulations, our code specifies what they have to actually submit to us. So any change to the submittal requirements actually takes a code amendment. We do ask for master plans. We do ask for, evidence that they're compliant with FCC, but we don't look at any type of RF requirements at all.
That was the answer they gave us from the podium, and that was insufficient, hence we're here tonight. So what can we do then to actually look to see, investigate, if there is any threat to our residents and our children by placing these devices within the public realm of either schools and or parks? So if it takes a code amendment, how do we go about initiating that, and what all do we ask for? Because after all, we're here to represent the residents.
Sure, that's something that we could look to see if we can collapse into the ordinance that our city attorney referenced, and if not, we could use that momentum to add it to a code amendment as well, and to see, quite frankly, how much leeway we have under the law. In fact, we might not have any. If we do have an iota of it, then we can push for that.
Just in a ballpark, what do you think the number of towers in town are now? 10?
Well,
50? 10 and 50?
Unfortunately, once again, what we manage is what's on private land and or public land that comes to us. So I believe there was an application behind the Denny's on Firestone and Dolan, Dave?
Yes.
And outside of that, like I said, in the 5 years I've been here, I've seen 2 others. And so what the cities, in our country are gearing up for is that leapfrog of technology and the wave of towers that will be coming in the public right-of-way, which is moving to the realm of the public works departments because they manage those public right-of-ways. So, I would doubt that we have a tremendous amount now, but we are going to see a lot of them coming. Our public works department is working closely with our city attorney's office. I believe since the beginning of the year, they've got 22 applications in. And so once again, you balance that 22 with the 3 that we've seen on the macro towers in the 5 years that I've been here. Hence the work on the ordinance, hence you folks hearing this information today, and hence, everybody in the industry being sensitive and attentive to what's happening.
So we're looking at a Model T when Tesla's coming at us. That's what it is. Sorry.
Well, would you know in any of those 22 that you spoke of, there is movement, technological movement to provide local area networks via the top of a street light, which is at 30 feet, to serve an area around a school, to provide internet to a school, or city parks. Here's another example, the lighting standards in the city park, same thing, to provide citywide or pockets of citywide internet. Have you seen any of that yet?
You know what? The carriers are looking at it because they're looking at gaps in coverage. So it's exactly that. And they're also looking at users. And so as you mentioned, where you've got people that are natural meeting places, places of work, schools, they're looking at those gaps as well.
Yes, and if I could just say, so I first on the FCC standards, so the carriers have to meet those standards, whether they submit proof of it to in their application or not. So that I think their general practice is that they would do those reviews anyway because they would have to demonstrate that compliance. They can't violate the FCC standards, and the responsibility for policing that is really at the FCC, including interference, which is a different issue than just safe RF emissions, but interference among license frequencies also is the FCC. And the FCC did a couple, I'm trying to think, it may be like 3 years ago, after some complaints or something. I don't know how it came before them. They did some inspections on some Verizon rooftop facilities in particular, and found a lot of non-compliance in terms of painting and safety. And I think they penalized the company and also required them to enter into a compliance plan where they test those facilities, I think every year or 2 years. So there is some work at the federal level as well on this issue. And then I was just going to comment on the issue of schools. That is I think one of the most difficult, because we see people come out on both sides in terms of the wireless facilities and coverage and capacity in schools. If people are concerned about the RF emissions and having facilities close to schools, but then at the same time they want to be able to reach their children if there's a problem, and they're concerned when they can't reach them. So that's probably one of the thorniest issues out there in terms of deployment.
I do have a question. You mentioned that they can install their system in any pole, practically, that they wish to.
Well, certainly the FCC is suggesting that in terms of if you were to come up with rules that said, you can only place a facility every 1,500 feet, and that meant that they couldn't place facilities where they felt they needed to get to achieve their coverage objectives. Yeah.
Well, my question would be, if that's the case, if they can use an existing pole to put their equipment, is there a limit of how much equipment they can put on a pole, or how much weight they can put on a pole, how much a pole can take?
Yes. So for utility poles, there is a whole body of regulation that is actually issued by the California Public Utilities Commission on what's a safe installation of any kind of equipment, whether it's electrical or telephone lines or wireless facilities on utility poles. They have one of the orders is General Order 95, which is this giant phone book size, if anyone remembers what a phone book looks like, phone book size order. And they go through a whole process with the pole owner of wind loading and testing to make sure that the pole can actually withstand the additional equipment, and if it can't, it has to be replaced. For streetlights, depends on who owns them. So SoCal Edison owns a lot of streetlights. They have come up with their own safety standards that are not issued by the PUC, but are SoCal Edison standards. And then also a lot of cities own streetlights, and they develop their own standards for what would be a safe installation.
Any other questions from the commission?
I have one last question.
Yes, sir.
Is there an ordinance, whether it be through a city or some other entity, that you guys have seen success with, not only with the cell phone towers, but with cities in regards to safety, aesthetics, and cooperation with the cell towers?
We're working on a lot of them right now. So you have to kind of define what you mean by success.
So each individual city obviously should have an ordinance that they provide to cell phone companies when they propose to build a tower. Has one in particular, whether it be, a specific city, has it shown success not only with the cell phone companies, but in the city, whether it's aesthetically appealing, safety? Is there an ordinance that's the bellwether among ordinances that we can, as a city, look to create our own guidelines that are successful from both perspectives?
I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of common elements in a lot of the ordinances, but there's always unique issues. And then these recent rules, everyone is in the midst of updating their ordinances now to address them, and we've had very few applications even come under any of these ordinances. They're literally happening. It's happening right now in terms of the updating. On the macro cell sites, I don't know. I don't know if I think that was like a simpler world where cities sort of chose areas that they liked, and did they like fake palm trees or not like fake palm trees, and And depending on sort of the nature of the community, it was easier or harder to deal with cell site installations. And that the nature of the community is not only, you know, is it mostly residential, or are there commercial industrial areas that naturally you'd be okay with having these kind of deployments? Is it really hilly and difficult terrain to serve or not? You know, and every city, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of uniqueness I find in every city that I work with. I don't know if that's a very satisfactory answer, but that's how I've seen it.
And it's always a challenge on all sides. We face a big challenge in terms of what the future brings us. But just to give you an example, the macro poll that was approved at the Public Works Yard recently by the Planning Commission, on the planning side with the planning permit entitlement process, was typical. It took anywhere from 4 to 5 months to get through that. On the lease negotiations with that site, we've been working with Verizon for over 2 years on negotiating a lease, over 2 years. And the reason is because we're looking to protect our community, looking also to be fiscally prudent in terms of how we negotiate that lease. And Verizon is taking their business practices and trying to protect their interests as well. So we don't take this stuff lightly on either side. On the application side, be it through the planning department, or on the business side when we negotiate a lease. And they're things that take a long time to get through.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. Karish, thank you very much for your time. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does the Director of Community Development have any changes to the agenda?
No, Chair Dominguez, no changes to the agenda.
Does the Director of Community Development have a report on City Council actions?
Nothing to report out from the City Council, Chair Dominguez.
And now is the time set aside for public hearings. The public hearing for PLN-180033 is now open. Does the Secretary have proof of publication?
Yes, we do.
Will the Director of Community Development introduce the staff making the presentation?
Thank you, Chair Dominguez. Tonight we have our Assistant Planner, Madeline Welch. Madeline Welch is our newest staff person. She's been with us since November of last year, and this is her first presentation from the Planning Commission. Madeline Welch, was first introduced to us as a volunteer and came and did a bang-up job. And then we didn't scare her away. She came back and provided service as an intern, a paid intern, and as she started to grow with the organization, she won a job as an assistant planner with us, and tonight she's presenting. Welcome, Madeline.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. David, you better look out.
Dominguez and members of the Planning Commission. Tonight you are being asked to consider a proposed modification to an existing planned sign program at 13101 through 13113 Lakewood Boulevard for a property located on the southwest corner of Lakewood Boulevard and Gardendale Street, known as the Gardendale Center. The site is zoned C2 for general commercial, and it is currently developed with a 12,056 square foot commercial building comprising of 8 tenant spaces, as well as a 126 square foot kiosk, which is located on the north side of the parking lot. The code states that a planned sign program shall be required for any site having 3 or more non-residential tenants. There are a total of 56 parking spaces on this property, as well as 2 access points, one from Gardendale Street and the other from Lakewood Boulevard. The surrounding uses include an auto repair shop to the north, a used auto sales store to the east, a 3-tenant commercial building to the south, and residential to the west. This property had an original planned sign program which was established in 1989. The applicant is now requesting a modification to the sign program to enhance the overall appearance of the center. The proposal for tonight is to allow 1 channel letter wall sign per tenant space of the building, as well as for the kiosk. Along with the wall sign, the 2 corner tenant spaces and the kiosk would be allowed a secondary wall sign, which shall be placed as indicated on the proposed planned sign program. The planned sign program will also include 1 monument sign for the commercial center, which will remain the same as it was previously allowed in 1989. Each proposed wall sign will be centered on the storefront facade of each tenant space, and each tenant space is allowed 1.5 square feet of sign area per lineal foot of tenant space. The sign width may vary due to varying tenant space sizes, but the maximum sign copy area shall be 75% of the sign area. The height shall remain as previously approved at 24 inches, and the signs will now be made with acrylic or vinyl instead of plexiglass, with a variety of font and colors allowed. The signs will be internally illuminated with LED with the option of channel, reverse channel, or dual. Here are some examples showing the different illumination options. Staff feels that the findings can be made in a positive manner and likes the overall appearance of the proposed signs. The requested signage meets the maximum allowed per Downey zoning code, and the applicant is not requesting any deviations. Therefore, that concludes my report, and I'm able to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Welsh. Does the Commissioner Spathos, any questions?
You mentioned on the signage was going to be based on the size and square footage of each individual unit. Does that mean that the actual channel letters would be different in each individual unit? So one, for example, would be 24 inches that has a larger space. Would the next space that is a smaller space be allowed to have 12 inches? Or is it consistent among all the spaces?
So it's a maximum height of 24 inches. However, the maximum copy area is 75% of the sign area.
So it would be feasible, or you would actually have different size channel letters with each individual store if they decided to do so?
Yeah, so the way that the sign program works is they have that maximum height. Right. So they could go shorter, or they could go right up to the maximum. The overall square footage of the sign is determined by how wide their tenant space is. So a tenant space that has a wider frontage will get more sign area than someone that's a little bit more narrow. Typically what we see is that adjustment happen on the width of the sign, which gives them adjustment how much language they can actually put to the sign, and we'll see pretty standard heights, but those will adjust a little bit according to the tenant space sizes.
And one of the goals of the sign program is uniformity, so that you've got consistent looks outside of trademarks and national retailers or other businesses that take or mandate their own logos, but you're looking for a uniform look and an improvement to a site.
But it could also be like one we visited last was on the Imperial Highway there with each tenant space using its own creative fonts, in order to display who was in that space.
And a lot of that's driven through the tenants, most of the nationals. So you'll see that State Farm Insurance, they can be put in the mix of anybody, and you're going to get the same old State Farm Insurance. What we try to drive is the quality, the illumination, the layout on the building. But yeah, it does allow for some creativity and uniformity with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fermetto.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I have no other questions.
Commissioner Owens?
No, as well. Thank you. And I have no questions.
Vice Chair Downey.
Just one question I have for the corner ones that are allowed a second sign. Is that for the east and west side of their businesses, or where are those placed?
Correct. So it would be the ones that are located on, for example, for tenant space 1 on Lakewood right there, and then for tenant B, or 8, sorry, it would be right there.
Could I ask, readdress the key shop, the little kiosk? Does he get 3, one in front, one on each side?
It's allowed 2. So the primary would be the one facing Gardendale, and the secondary facing Lakewood.
In the central tower, does that clock work? If it does not work, can we insist that it become functional?
So that clock is actually a cell tower, by the way. It is actually required
aesthetically
to work.
pleasing, I may say.
Yes, I believe one of the conditions on it is that it is a functional clock.
Yes.
So if you notice that the time is off or it's not functional, we can gladly reach out to the operator and make sure that it gets fixed.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Phenomenal first try. Success, home run. Thank you.
Actually, can you go back to the aerial view? I had a quick question. Something that I just picked up the other one before that one. Before that one. There you go. What is there a structure that it looks like a white roof to the right there? Yes?
I believe there's no structure on the site visit, but I believe it could be like a tent or something in the parking lot.
Yeah, Commissioner Fermetta, most likely that was, I believe there's a flower shop there, so my guess is they probably had a parking lot sale going on the day that the aerial were taken, so it was, there was just a temporary type thing.
All right, thank you.
Thank you again. Before I call the applicant and his or her representative, this will be the time for any planning commissioner to discuss any pre-hearing site visits, pre-hearing discussions the commissioners may have had about the project. Commissioners? None? Okay. Commissioner Fermetta?
None.
Commissioner Owens?
Only I use that key shop. I use my favorite key shop. I had no discussion.
Vice Chair Downey? And none for me. Will the applicant and his or her representative please come forward to give testimony? Please state your name and address. Please.
Yes, hi. My name is Scott Blaze, and the asset manager for Howard Properties, the owner of property. It's talked 3 times on the phone. We have time with the phone.
And you are?
If you can get closer and speak into the mic, just want to make sure that we record.
For Scott. My name is Alexis Estrada.
Thank you very much, both of you. Would you like to make a presentation or add value?
I'd like to thank everybody. Fine job on this. I didn't realize this person was well deserved. I think she did a great job and represented us. Mr. Blumenthal and also Al Dushan are making this happen. I think it'll beautify the corner.
Okay. Alexis?
No.
Very good. Would Commissioner Spathis have any questions? Commissioner Fermetta?
No questions other than thank you for beautifying the corner there. I have driven by there by doing this upgrade will be very good to that area. Thank you.
Commissioner Owens?
I would definitely agree with this Commissioner Fermetta. Welcome upgrade. This is a welcome upgrade. Thank you.
And Vice Chair Downey. I have none. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Has there been any correspondence in favor or opposition?
There have been no correspondence.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to speak either in favor or opposition of this application? Does the planning staff have a recommendation?
Staff recommends Planning Commission approve plan design program subject to conditions contained in the resolutions. The next resolution number is 19-3080.
Okay. -18-000033 is now closed. Commissioners, now is our time. So, Commissioner Spathos. Comments? Questions?
No, I mean, it was a good presentation. It looked good. I think it will be a good improvement for that corner. I have also used that kiosk for keys many times.
Okay. Chairman Fermetta?
No, I'm in favor. I like the new appearance that they're going to have is up of those banners up against the building. So I am in favor.
Okay. Commissioner Owens?
I concur with my fellow commissioners. It's a great improvement.
And Vice Chairman Downey.
I also agree. I actually used to get my right there all the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
What is the pleasure of the Planning Commission? May I have a motion?
I'll motion to approve PLN-18-0033, resolution number 19-3080.
Second.
Do I have a first and a second? Okay, may I have a vote, please?
It was motioned by Commissioner Owens, seconded by Commissioner Frometta, and passed by a vote of 5-0 to approve the request for a planned sign program, resolution number 19-3080. Planned sign program, PLN 18-00033.
Very good. The action of the Planning Commission is final unless the matter is appealed to the City Council with the appropriate fees and with the specified time period set forward in the city's ordinance. What do we? 1 minute. We're going to break. Okay, we're resuming the Planning Commission meeting. Does the Director of Community Development have another staff member to introduce for the following presentation?
Yes, thanks, Chair Dominguez. I'm actually going to take a crack at this next presentation. I know Madeline set the bar pretty high, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge.
The old bones.
Mary, if I can get the slide up there.
Please.
I'm fine here. Thanks, Steve.
No problem.
So the item that's in front of you tonight is an amendment to the development agreement that we have with the owner of the promenade and the remaining 21 vacant acres. And the development agreement covers that entire site. I know there might be a concept that is only covering what's been built out in terms of the promenade, but it in fact covers that back 20. And also, one of the remaining pieces in that promenade is the historic site, and that's the NASA Volti wing there. That's approximately 36,000 square feet that we're trying to deal with. And going back to how we marketed this item, we went through and sent out our public notices. And the last time that we were in front of you, I believe it was in August of 2017, there were suggestions that we call out the location as to what it's known as. The location formerly known is as the Tierra Luna Development Agreement, and so people know it as the Promenade at Downey. So we listen, and so this time in the public notice, we literally put AKA the Downey Promenade. So folks that receive those public notices around there, and even folks that look at our staff reports, were able to see that and kind of understand from a practical perspective what we are talking about. In terms of what we have here, the amendment is only requesting a time extension to the development agreement, and that's for 10 years. Now, I know in layman's terms, 10 years feels like a long time, and unfortunately, in government terms, 10 years isn't that long of time in terms of how much it takes to build out a site of this nature and even deal with the remnant sites that's there. In a built-out area, here in the LA region, it's difficult to find 21 acres of vacant land. And so we want to be really thoughtful about it. On the private side also, it's going to take some time to do some real estate negotiations for that site. When we last amended that development agreement and the lease agreement for those vacant 21 acres, the goal was to mandate a hotel to be developed on that site, and we got that. Developing a hotel on that site is going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time for the leasee to actually negotiate a deal with a hotel, and they're looking at prime hotel users as the Marriott and the Hyatt, and they'll put in a brand that they believe is going to do well in that market. And as an example, the Marriott development on Firestone. Now, that was approved by the Planning Commission on February 15th of 2017, almost 2 years ago. And the Marriott's really, really strict. When they put their label on something, they want to make sure it's as pristine as it can be, because they live and die by the reviews. And so they've been beating up the developer and the future landowner of that site over a lot of different building elements on that site. In the 11th hour, they came back to them and said, we don't like the thickness of your window panes. We want them to be thicker. You may say that train's only going to drive by twice a day, but we don't want people to even realize that there's tracks there. Same thing with the landscaping and the layouts of the room. From the city side, for instance, we've been done with the building plan check for probably about 4 months now. And so now it's been the future owner dealing with the Marriott. So once again, that stuff takes a bit of time. We are anticipating that they're going to start construction by the end of this calendar year with that hotel, because once again, we're interested in redeveloping that site and getting a much better use there as well. And then we've got the Kaiser Permanente site. That's adjacent to those 21 acres. As the Planning Commission knows, we've been very active with our biomedical overlay zone, and we've been very fortunate in the city to have 3 large medical providers. We've got Kaiser, PIH, and then Rancho Los Amigos, where we're doing what we can to expand and grow those uses based on the high caliber of jobs that they provide, based on the service to the community that they also provide. And Kaiser, once again, is a large bureaucracy. And they move at their pace as well. So as they start to engage the leasee in those back 21 acres, it's going to take them some time to go through a real estate transaction. They're not going to go in and want a quarter of an acre. They're going to go in and they're going to want a nice substantial piece. And so once again, that's going to be balanced out with the vision for that site. And then we've got the remaining build out of the NASA Multi-Wing. And the challenge there, it's on the Federal National Register of historic places on that site. So we then have to tiptoe through that site to see how we can adaptively reuse it. And what we want to do is we want to work with the owner, with the school district, and with the city through the Columbia Memorial Space Center to put in a community use such as a business incubator and drive it through the STEM program that the school district is active in promoting and what's being actively promoted through the Columbia Memorial Space Center. And to do that, we're going to access federal tax credits. So we'll be needing to work through the Department of the Treasury on that. We've just witnessed a federal shutdown. We've witnessed some of the chaos that's happening at the federal level. Well, we'll soon be at their mercy with an application in front of them. And those applications aren't released on a monthly basis. They're released only twice a year. And so you're waiting in 6-month cycles. And once your application is in, they're not approved on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. It takes quite a bit of time to get those back as well. And we're also going to try to fill the funding gap through the state historic tax credits as well. That's going to be a challenging build out. So once again, we're going to try to seek financial assistance from the state. And same process with the state. Those tax credits aren't released on a monthly basis. They're released more quarterly, and it turns into a very long process with the application and roping in a lot of subject matter experts, some architectural historians to make sure that we produce a very competitive application to get those funds, because those funds aren't guaranteed as well. And then in terms of that entire process, that may drag out a few years or even longer than that, we may look at a subtle recession or a recession of any level. And then that then provides some delays or some challenges in regards to the timeline for the build out of those different aspects of that site. Regardless, with all of that, we're not deterred. This is the business that we're in. We go in to the most challenging sites in our community and attempt to facilitate a redevelopment of those sites to get better uses. We've been in partnership with this landowner since 2003. So it's 16 years that we've worked with them to attempt to redevelop this site in an optimal use. So we look forward to a long partnership with them in the future. And in front of you today, we're asking for a 10-year extension for that development agreement. And the role of Planning Commission tonight is to make a recommendation to Council. Council ultimately will make the approval of the extension of the development agreement. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Spathos, do you have any questions?
Chairman?
Chairman?
What?
I will abstain since I work at Kaiser Permanente as my employer and I am close to this property.
Thank you, sir. Do you have any questions?
So from what I understand, this is the same property developer who has operated the property since 2003? Same company?
Well, it's actually sold. And the Promenade location with the shopping center sold, I believe, last year in September. And so the entity that leases those vacant 21 acres is still in a joint partnership with the owner of the Promenade. They've got a relationship formally through an operating agreement. And so that's what binds this entire area, which is governed by this development agreement.
Commissioner Owens?
Yeah, just a couple comments, not necessarily questions. So, the ask is 10 years, an extension of 10 years. I had brought it up in the past, and I had a problem with that, but with basically the dust screens, the aesthetics, the blight, looking of the property from time to time. Mm-hmm. Who would maintain it in the next 10 years? You're still going to make demands on the operator, the property owner? The city's going to take that over? How are we going to keep it, in some sort of reasonable shape so the tumbleweeds aren't 8 foot round and the dust screens aren't, 2 inches packed with, dirt and mud?
We're going to continue to bug the leasee on that. We check in with them on a quarterly basis to make sure that they're keeping that place clean. Recently with the rains, I was in town on Sunday, and I was glad to see that area didn't flood. I believe when they first built it out, there was some issues with the underground water flow, and they've since fixed that, but we attempt to stay on top of them best we can in regards to the screening and so forth. They recently did a sublease with Kaiser and allowed them to park on a large portion of that site to alleviate
nicely, yeah.
Yeah, alleviate any site issues as Kaiser builds out, but we'll do our best to continue to stay on top of that. Now, the reality is it won't stay vacant for 10 years. The goal is to continue to move them forward so that they can redevelop that site, and it's unfortunately the challenges and anything else in the complexity of that site which lends itself to that amount of a time extension.
Yeah, and I also I know the city continually seeks a certain caliber of tenants. Aldo knows I'm a little critical of the promenade as it is, just based on some of the tenants there, but should be greater than and not lesser than. And I think that will continue to be the goal. Mm-hmm. In regards to the historical site, it's odd shape, remains. Mm-hmm. Tough to get a tenant in there. I might suggest, and I can tell you offline, or I can just say it here. There's a incubator downtown in the Arts District in LA Kretz. So maybe look into that. It's sponsored by Department of Water and Power. So if you could co-join a sponsor, might be some relief, and some way to attract for the STEM purposes, the right, the right thinking, the right development in that spot. The last thing that I had an issue with, and again, Aldo knows this as well. We had a request here to open up the operating covenant of that site a year ago, 18 months ago, and the talk at the time was about the fire station that was originally planned. Going forward, I believe there's a fire station on a temporary basis planned to be placed in there while the 4 stations in town get some remodel. So that's a good use too. I wish we would have got the new station there, but that's just me. But thank you for your presentation.
Sure. Chairman Owens, you're exactly right about the quality incubators that exist. We did a staff visit to the Department of Water and Power's business incubator in the Arts District. A pretty fabulous spot over there in terms of the direction that they're moving with clean energy. There's actually there's also another really cool one in Pasadena, the Idea Lab that we visited as well. They all seem to take on a certain theme. And what we want to do is we want to leverage what the school district is doing and what we have at the Columbia Memorial Space Center with STEM, and then see how we can grow that. And the whole purpose, once again, is to attract startup businesses and allow them to grow within a low-cost, low-overhead environment so they can become profitable.
And for this city, that's an awesome goal, awesome plan. Mm-hmm. That's all I have.
Vice Chairman Downey.
Yeah, I have just a comment, like Commissioner Owen said, specifically on the historical site, because I think that's probably been the only one that's been kind of an eyesore in terms of just the last couple of years, broken out windows, things of that nature. So are we saying it's a historical site where it won't be torn down, or is there any for somebody coming in is there any requirements that they keep it a certain manner, or in terms of being a historical site or not?
Yeah, as Commissioner Owens mentioned, it's an odd-shaped building, and in terms of the restrictions under its historic designation, the easiest way to explain it is the outside has to remain the same. And so the inside, difficult to work around, just based on the kind of archaic construction and infrastructure that it has. So that turns a ton of people away. in terms of retailers' uses and so forth. And so that's where we try to step in to say, well, if we can access some funding to close a building gap and a build-out gap of that site, then we might be able to make it more active. And then we start to tie in community uses that are complementary to this area and partners and so forth. But the bottom line is, with historical uses, you generally don't touch the outside. You don't touch the windows, the doors, the mullions, the facade, the roof lines, the parapets, any of that stuff.
Okay.
Thank you. So this all started in 2003 with the sale, and groundbreaking was 2012?
No, groundbreaking was, I think the first groundbreaking was in 2015. I want to say December-ish of 2015. For the first retailers that came out. I believe the 24-hour fitness and the theater were one of the first larger entities that opened up.
So it took 9 years from sale to actual proof of concept, right? Okay. So now it's been 16 years since the sale, and we still have dirt on those 21. In your professional opinion, what's the holdup? Why hasn't a development been proposed or ground broken on those 21?
Sure, it's an extremely complex real estate transaction, and it goes back historically. That area was owned by the federal government and NASA, and the area went from Stewart and Gray over to where the new Kaiser Orchard building is. And it literally took an act of Congress to start to release that land to be sold and redeveloped to the city. And the city started to buy it in parcels and redevelop it in parcels, and then to sell it to those users, much like the Downey landing was created, and then the promenade. And so the entity that purchased that site from the city was the individual that developed the promenade, and then they leased those back 20 acres as well. And that was during the Downey Studios presence. So they had those buildings on that site. So they were dealing with downsizing those uses at the Downey Studio, which is not easy to unravel, dealing with the redevelopment of that entire promenade site, which a site that large is complex as well. And then phasing in all of that development. And then in light of that, the federal government has a covenant on that site, those remaining 20 acres, that dictates how and when sales can occur or real estate transactions could occur. Right now, in terms of this coming up, that covenant is going to sunset in April of 2019. So we're now all gearing up to have a bit of freedom now that isn't hanging over our heads, so it allows us some time to start to plan, facilitate, and hope to move things at a quicker pace.
So there was forewarning, if not frank elucidation of all these encumbrances, and probably as early as before 2003, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so you knew about all these encumbrances prior to the sale of 2003, and certainly, before 2012.
Oh yeah, and it scared a lot of people away.
So the Canadian company that purchased it with full knowledge of these encumbrances and deadlines, yes? So they should have been able to organizationally have dealt with this in a timely manner in order to have something there now, correct?
Well, hindsight's 2020, and I think
foresight of any business organization allows you to run multiple tracks to be successful.
Well, that's a fair observation. I think one component that we need to appreciate through that whole time span is I think we went through two different recessions, with one being categorized as a Great Recession. So I think if anything, it's admirable that the developer and owner stuck around and didn't walk away and or sell it back, because if anything, they've showed some fortitude to stick around that long.
Well, that might be your opinion, but I'm not sure it's the opinion of a lot of residents who dislike the promenade, period.
Sure.
Okay, well, I've said enough. Thank you. Before I call the applicant and his or representative, it's time for any planning commissioner to disclose any pre-hearing site visits and or pre-hearing discussions the commissioner may have had about the project. Commissioner Smathis.
No comments, no questions.
But Commissioner Owens.
None, thank you.
Vice Chairman Duarte? Likewise, none. Representative, please come forward to give testimony. Please state your name and address.
Name and address?
Correct.
My name is Jeffrey Cook, and my address is 15 Via Picado in San Clemente, California, 92673. You know, I don't need to add much to what Aldo said, but you know, we're proud of what we developed in the promenade, and we're excited about turning our attention to the 21 acres that is next to the promenade and developing that as well. You know, I'm happy to field any questions that you have about that.
Commissioner Spathos?
You mentioned you were a member of the leasing company or the development company that operates it right now.
The company that I represent, we developed the promenade at Downey. Okay. And then, so as Aldo said, we sold it to another operator last year.
Are you involved in any way at this point in leasing or development or bringing in tenants? What's your role in the development of that property as we speak?
Yeah, so we now are the lessee,
right,
of the 21 acres. And so...
the lessor being
you.
The city of Downey?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, and to be clear, I think if I understand the commissioner's question correctly, today the individual that stands before you is not overseeing the leasing activities at the promenade. That's being done by the new ownership there. So you're right. You've got an ownership entity that owns that land, and they then have a leasing entity affiliated with them that will work with future transactions and/or their current tenants.
So is it a subleasee, or is it just another company that's been hired to do the leasing?
It's generally another company that's been hired to assist them with the leasing.
So what's their role in the development or leasing of the property?
You know, they don't have it. Well, their role in the leasing of the property is just that: as vacancies come up or as vacancies exist, to go out and solicit tenants for those sites. It's a traditional leasing role in that promenade. That leasing activity is not related to this extension here.
So let me understand. Those 21 acres are still owned by the city, or were they sold to that other company?
They are owned by the city, and they're leased to Mr. Cook's company, or the company that he works for.
And that name is?
Pardon? That name is PCCP-IRG.
Got it.
And it's a leasing company, not a development company.
No. We lease them to the company that. Well, let Jeff.
Yeah. So
it's his company.
So the company that leases the land, the 21 acres from the city of Downey, is PCCP IRG Downey LLC and IRG Downey LLC. It's a joint venture. That is the company that leases the land from the city of Downey right now.
What is the length or tenant of your lease? How many years do you have it for?
It's at the last. I think it was August 2017 when we extended it to 55 years at that date, so there's about 53 years remaining roughly.
And it was Alberta that you got it from, right?
Alberta was the development company that we hired to help us develop the promenade at Downey.
Got it.
Okay. Do you have any concrete plans currently for those 21 acres?
No, just schematic drawings at this point. You know, our plan is to go out to market and find tenants, and once we have kind of agreements in place with tenants, to develop the site and to come to the city with applications for development.
So in the last 16 years, what sort of progress have you made in trying to fulfill what you just espoused?
So there's although refer to a lot of the factors surrounding that, but the main factor was the downturn in 2007. So we had a leasing plan in place in 2007, and we were going to the market in 2007, and the economic downturn hit, and there were no tenants available to lease the site. After that, we emerged from that in 2010, and in partnership with the city of Downey, modified the entitlement application, basically, and went through the entitlement process after that downturn. We started in about 2009, 2010, negotiated agreements with the city of Downey, including the development agreement, which was approved in 2012. And so once the development agreement was approved in 2012, we actually went to the market and started getting tenants in 2011. And so once the entitlement vested in 2012, we demoed the 1 million square feet of buildings that were there. During that demo, there were environmental issues that we had to deal with from the previous environmental problems with the site.
Paint shop.
And so that demo, and to get a no further action letter from the water board that had authority over the site, that took about 2 years, which was much longer than we anticipated, but we had to go through the process with the water board. So after that, after the demo was complete and we got the no further action letter from the water board, that was the governing environmental authority over the site, we were able to start construction. And so we immediately started construction, developed the site from 2015 to 2017. Everything opened in 2016, 2017, and are now focused on the 21 acres that are what we're talking about today. As Aldo mentioned, there were certain site restrictions that we knew about when we purchased the site, which was why we've focused more on the parcel that we owned in fee, which was the 60 acres. So after completing development of that site, we've turned our attention to the ground lease parcel, understanding that some of those restrictions of the federal government expire in April of 2019. So it's much easier to attract tenants and do deals with that restriction expiring.
Do you think that 10 years then is a sufficient amount of extension, or do you think that you'll be back before us for another extension?
No, I think 10 years is a sufficient amount of time to extend. Us as developers, we want to develop it as quickly as possible. Now, there are a lot of complexities, especially with this site, with environmental issues, historical designations, and it's a great site. I mean, you have 20 acres infill site in the city of Downey, which is great, and so there are going to be a lot of tenants looking at the site, and Aldo mentioned Kaiser has interest, as well as hotel developers, and so there's going to be some complexity in working out what is the best use of the site, but as far as we're concerned, we're going to move forward as quickly as possible. It doesn't help us to wait at all, because we're paying rent obviously as it is, and want to develop and monetize the site as quickly as possible.
I understand your motivation. Have the hotels that you've approached, what has been their response to actually breaking ground and setting up a hotel of the caliber that we want here in Downey?
I think we've had good response from hotel developers that really like the site, and we expect really strong interest from hotels, actually, and have received interest from the typical brands that you would expect, high quality brands that want to be here. So it'll be a negotiation because it's a little different. I mean, hotels typically are buying in fee and developing their properties in fee. This is a lease, and so there are some complexities that we're going to have to work through, but there's going to be strong demand for hotel for the site.
What is Kaiser's presumed role or interest?
So we don't know exactly because they haven't told us or made a proposal or an offer yet. I know the city, Aldo has had contact with Kaiser, and I have also, and we've encouraged them to make a proposal. And so we expect them to make a proposal shortly, but they haven't yet. But I think that they want to expand you know, their hospital is doing very, very well, and they're looking for expansion land.
5-story medical office.
So the hotel is going to consume how many acres?
We've set aside in the last ground lease amendment that we executed with the city, we set aside 3 acres for development of hotel.
So the other 18 acres would be retail or medical arts?
The development agreement allows a combination of office, medical office, and retail.
Medical office and retail, okay. And if Kaiser does not come through, are you looking to solicit other medical or to convert that to retail?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be demand from other medical office developers or, you know, tenants that want to be close to Kaiser and just close to kind of a medical hub, especially with the amenity of the promenade at Downey next door, which is a huge amenity also for the hotel. So I think that there's going to be demand from medical office tenants, regular office tenants, and then more kind of you know, pad retail users.
Pad retail, like we have now at the promenade?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
For the longest time, we had an underground push for a dirt bike park.
I think it's
Didn't
still
happen.
there. Yeah.
You know, I have a question in terms of the environmental aspects you mentioned. On those 21 acres, do you foresee having issues that prolong this project, or?
No. So right now we have a no further action letter for the site for soils and groundwater, and so basically the water board, which is the governing authority over the site, has deemed the site fully developable. So we're hoping to not encounter any additional environmental issues.
You know, last time you guys were here, we spoke about the use of that vacant land for different resources for the city. One was, you know, small park. Someone once mentioned maybe a parking lot. I won't say who. Joking. Right now, it's not aesthetically pleasing. It's not utilized by the residents. In that period of time while the land lays stagnant, is there any way you could use that land for the good of the public, i.e. grass or something that would allow some of the neighborhood kids to play in? And I don't know about the liability issues, but you know, that certainly would like to see that other than just a cordoned off 21 acres that sort of sits there with, as was stated before, tumbleweeds.
Yeah, so right now, almost the entire south half of the site is used by Kaiser for parking for their displaced parking during construction of their medical office building. And so really the only land that's not used is on the northern part of the property, north of Apollo Way.
That's about 10 acres, right?
Yeah, it's about 10 acres.
Yeah.
And you know, we've talked about various temporary uses while we're, you know, negotiating and site planning and moving forward with the development, and you know, we're open to those discussions. As mentioned, you know, we've talked about a temporary fire station on that north parcel.
Thank you.
A question: What's currently being done to bring in tenants or to develop the property? Are we waiting to extend the lease, or is something actively being done right now to get tenants in to look at it, to spark interest? Is anything happening right now actively as we speak with your company?
Yeah, so we have a broker that we've hired that is talking to tenants, and we are actually negotiating with a few different tenants right now. And we've mentioned the discussions with Kaiser. You know, Kaiser moves at a very slow pace. Yeah. They're a large organization, but we expect to engage with them in discussions as well.
Are these like big box retailers, or is it group retail that's done usually in large sites like that, or is it? How do you go about bringing in not just one large prospective tenant, but multiple tenants to develop the area rather than just, because there's got to be a build out before you attract potential tenants, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's more, we have a retail broker, we have an office broker, and then we are having discussions also directly with tenants. We've had direct discussions with hotels, direct discussions with Kaiser. So it's more of, you know, who has interest in the site, and once we have a clearer picture of kind of the different groups that we're talking to, we'll site plan the site and then come to the city with our proposed development. And so there's a lot of different kind of moving parts in a development this large, especially in, you know, in a place like the city of Downey, that's so infill. There's, you know, pretty much everything is developed around here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's complicated, and, you know, we're talking to a lot of different groups. But you know, once we can kind of put the pieces together and get further along down the road with our discussions and negotiations with these tenants, that's when we'll come to the city with our proposed site plan and kind of go through the city plan check process.
Do you at this point have any semi-committed tenants or anyone who would kind of move that train along? In other words, if you have, you know, a large tenant who has semi-committed or has shown interest in the property to where you would be able to move along some type of development to include different retail or a medical facility, or because my understanding is it's hard to attract a tenant if there's not a build out. You know, if I'm a large tenant who wants to develop a certain site, if there's not a build out or a plan or some type of rendering of what's going to be there, how are we sparking interest with potential tenants?
Yeah, so we have, you know, we have a rendering for the site, several different renderings, I guess, depending on who we're talking to. We also have the development next door, obviously.
Right.
But we're in negotiations right now with multiple tenants. So, you know, we don't have any committed yet, but really it's, you know, if you're a tenant, it's a unique opportunity, right? There's not many new development of this size and scale in the area. So, most tenants know about the site. So it's not hard to say, it's not hard to sell, I guess.
So your model is build to suit, right?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the models we're looking at, where we'll essentially build a building for the tenant and they'll move in.
I'll be honest with you. I don't like what you did here before, and a lot of people in Downey don't either. We were a few years ago wishing you'd done something that looks like the Grove or something more community oriented, and all we got was a bunch of buildings and a lot of parking lots. So, having said that and having heard that, maybe when you move forward, you can come up with a plan that actually fits the needs of the community, and that is a community meeting place where people can come with their children, their aged family. They can sit around, look at ducks, have some waterfalls, have an ice cream cone, as opposed to dodging cars walking across the parking lot. So, having said that, I'll make a decision with the commission, but take that home, would you?
Sure.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Has there been any correspondence in favor or opposition?
No, there has not.
Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor or opposition to this application? Does the plan staff have a recommendation?
Yes, we do. Our recommendation is to approve the Second Amendment to the development agreement.
Okay.
It would be a recommendation to the city council to approve the amendment, the Second Amendment. So your action is going to be to recommend approval to the city council on that Second Amendment.
Any further discussion? May I have a motion?
Can I just make a comment? I feel that we, at least myself, maybe because I haven't been around enough, but I feel that we don't, at least I myself don't know enough as to what their plan is to lease out this property. It's such a huge development that I think if we discuss it further and we have a plan or we have some type of proposal as to what's coming in, what's the plan of action, how are they going to market it, what's going to go in, what type of tenant are we attracting? Have we examined, okay, can we do a multi-unit residential / retail, similar to some other areas that have developed in the past 10 years? I like it. I think they've done a great job. I go there all the time. I've been a member at LA Fitness. It's great. But I feel I don't know enough to make a decision today based on the 10 minutes that I heard.
Sure, and that's the challenge with the role of a planning commissioner. And what you're looking at is what the municipal code dictates, and the recommendation that you would then move forward to the city council so that they could make the decision. You're in a unique position up here in that you've got a background in real estate, so it allows you that insight to kind of weave through all those different nuances, but it's not the role that we have up here as planning commissioners. I will be at your beck and call if you guys have any questions in terms of the nuances as site plans come in or leasing plans start to be discussed, because all of that are natural progressions that happen at a staff level. If there's any deviations from the specific plan, those will come before you. If there's any site plans that need to be approved, that will come before you as well, but we won't dive into the leasing plan, we won't dive into tenants, we won't dive into any of those business transactions. It's what's applicable and related to the code that you have in front of you. And unfortunately, those limitations may be a bit frustrating, and that's with every planning commission in every city, but once again, as you sit, as the judge of something and adheres to the code, that's the world that we live in.
I want to refer the Planning Commission to the resolution that is before you. In that resolution, there's 2 criteria, and that's the criteria that you have to satisfy yourself with in order to adopt the resolution and make the recommendation to City Council. So if you go to agenda page 6, that's where the resolution is, and in section 3 of that resolution, you have to make 2 findings. That's number 1 and number 2. The first one is that the requested amendment of the development agreement is consistent with the city's adopted general plan. The second finding is similar, that the amendment to the development agreement is consistent with the specific plan. And in there, the staff has made an analysis, making in a positive manner both of those findings. So if in order to take a different action to not adopt the resolution, or to make a recommendation not to amend, you'd have to find that one of those or both are not met.
Gotcha.
That would be and again, if you want to deviate from the staff recommendation, you'd have to tell us why one or both of those aren't met, and then we'd bring back a resolution recommending that the council not adopt that second amendment. And then that goes up to the council, and then they look at the recommendation that you've sent up to them, and then they make their own decision. They'll either follow your recommendation or do something else. So that's kind of how it works here. But that's the criteria that governs this discussion. And these are all good questions and necessary questions, but the focus is those 2 findings.
And in regards to that, the second finding can also be argued that maybe the time frame is too long, and we can ask for staff to come back with a shorter recommendation time frame, whether it's 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, etc. So we can amend those and be within our rights and have staff come back with a recommendation either for or against, and have a motion on that if you think the 10 years is too long of a period of time. And that would sort of sit with what you're asking for, is more concreteness, more education or information. As opposed to a carte blanche 10-year period. Is that what you're asking for?
Well, I'm not asking for it specifically. My question was, as far as I'm concerned, I don't feel I know enough.
Yeah.
But these 2 items here, as Ms. Garcia has mentioned, do look like they've been met or have been followed, and if that's our responsibility here as a planning commission, I guess it goes to council, and it's their decision whether this is something that they want to approve.
Now, and again, as the chairman said, you can adopt the resolution and also add a recommendation to the council to consider a shorter period of time. But that would all depend on the contract. If the contract allows them, if there's some limitations that we can't reduce that time period less than 10 years, then, and I don't know the answer to that, then that may not be an option for you to recommend to the city council that they go 5 years or 8 years. If the contract, the underlying contract that allows the amendment or allows the extension says that they're entitled to get 10 years.
Well, you should know that. Do you know what that contract says?
No, I don't know what the answer to that question is. We're being represented by outside legal counsel on this one.
I see. Okay.
I know the answer to that. There isn't a set date in terms of the duration of the extension. We think from experience, we think from our discussions with the leasee out there and what we've seen on that site and all the different challenges that are there, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. We're also confident that the leasee is going to move at a brisk pace to try to make something happen at that site. But once again, as I mentioned in detail, it takes a long time to get this stuff done. And as we grapple once again with the NASA Volti wing, it's a slow process because you've got federal government, state government, city government, and other entities involved. So time flies when you start to look at this stuff, and we think 10 years is a good amount of time. And that's not to say that we're going to wait 9 months or 9 years and 6 months to do something. There's discussions in place now. They're going to continue. There's applications that need to be coordinated with the state and so forth. So it takes a bit of time.
We can see something?
Yeah, thank you. So having a little time sitting on this commission and a little bit of involvement, in these discussions in the past 5 years, my first comment would be I support what the chairman said and also support the new commissioner. And in their interest, this deal has changed a couple of times, and most deals do. And I would defer again to the newly placed commissioner as far as his background in real estate deals, change, conditions change. The 10 years seems to be too long. I'd like to see it shortened up. Also trust, though, that the new owner, heeded and heard, everything that we had to say in a critical manner. We don't want lesser than, we want better than. Some things over there I'm not happy with, as I expressed earlier. It just seemed that we put something, we space filled just in order to do that, and it didn't turn out to be such a great. I can't assess the sales. I don't know anything about it, but I wouldn't visit some of those establishments in there. Not my thing. That and on the other hand, understanding how hard it would be to develop a historical site. That's a difficult property, small. I envisioned that I mentioned to the chairman, that the microbrewery tanks would fit well around the different, architectural challenges in that building. So bring on a microbrewery, but that's just me. But on the other hand, to wait wouldn't be a bad idea, to give it a little more time. I know he's not at liberty, and we're not really allowed to ask, who he's got on the hook, if you will, as far as the development and who it's going to be. That's their business. The other thing unique here is that this is a private site, so our control is very little, and that's understood. And that I experienced early on as I, questioned the sale originally as Tierra Luna, Manarino, so on. That's how much I know about this. Was never happy with the whole thing. I thought it should have been something entirely different. But I would weigh in that to shorten the time would be probably in our best interest. And that would be my comments.
Is the other option, Aldo, to separate this out into leaving the NASA site at 10 years, since that's going to be more problematic with all the federal regulations, and have a shorter period of time for the 21 acres?
You could make that suggestion there. For us, the development agreement, it governs the entire site, so that's why we'd like to keep it uniform. But you could make that suggestion as well. And as the city attorney mentioned, the recommendation that you guys make to council, once again, they'll take into consideration. So, for instance, if you folks recommend to approve as suggested by staff, council will assess that. If you guys make a recommendation that's changed from that tonight, the council will also assess that as well. What we'll present to the council is staff had this recommendation. It was presented to the Planning Commission. They had a discussion. They've provided an alternative recommendation, and then council can make that can assess that and make their decision.
Or we can ask you to come back with substantiation of making the changes to present to council.
Well, I'd like to ask the city attorney, if that's an option, or we proceed with the alternative recommendations from the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I mean, my thought was that if you adopt the resolution, you can make the findings in the resolution. You can adopt the resolution and attach as a trailer there a recommendation that the council consider a shorter period of time. It would be preferable if you could tell us exactly the amount of time, but if you can't, you can just recommend that the council look at less than 10 years, and we can take that to the council. And we'll take the resolution plus this trailer recommendation to them, and it'll be incorporated in the staff report that this was the Planning Commission recommendation. So it's a trailer to this resolution, and then they would consider it as, they would consider the entire item. They'd consider your recommendation as well.
I consider that doublespeak, and I'll tell you why. In the last 2 years I've been here, we've had this similar situations where we've asked, there's been disagreement, there's been discussion, and there's been a tenor to request that the staff come back with a new recommendation. And that's been appropriate, and that's been accepted. And now, because of the circumstance here, we're saying, no, let's just go with the resolution with a trailer. Either we do the resolutions and trailers on all bodies and recommendations come before us, or we stick to what we've done in the past, and let's ask the city staff to come back with substantiation with a new recommendation. So we can't have it both ways.
Well, I think the nuance, though, there, Chairman, is with the other items that come before you, you're making a decision. And that unless that decision is appealed to the city council, your decision is final. Tonight, you're making a recommendation, and the council's decision is what's final on that. Hence the option to add that trailer, because the other thing that we need to consider, I know it's a challenge for us, is where's the overreach? The Planning Commission's purview is pretty focused into what those conditions are. And those conditions reference what the area is zoned for. We're not asking for any variance of the zoning. We're not asking for anything to change under that development agreement based on that. And so I do understand also, in human nature, we bring a lot of interest and we have a lot of opinions in terms of what's been there, and that guides a lot of who we are and how we form our opinions. So I agree with Chairman Owens. We've been trying to hustle to get a brewery in here for probably about 3 years, and we got close. There's that vacant building behind the Ortho mattress site, and we had Kings Harbor in. We chatted with them for about 5 months, and they just couldn't make it pencil. And unfortunately, we don't have a checkbook where we could fill their financial gap. And so a lot of those is Chairman Spathos knows too. It's the leasing. It's how aggressive you are. It's if you've got a spot, if the lease rates are compatible. It turns in that whole magic. Unfortunately, that's not what's in front of us tonight. What's in front of us is what the city attorney referenced. Is do we agree with the findings that have been made based on those uses there?
Just to go back on that, I do agree with the findings. I think it's a good idea maybe to put it on the council and recommend 5 years. Make them work on it. They're ultimately going to make the decision. They're a lot more knowledgeable in this whole thing. They've been versed in it for the past several years, so I'm confident that they'll make the right decision. But sure, I think a recommendation to go from 10 to 5 might not be a bad idea. And
the way it's worked in the past is the denial, and they go and look at why we denied it. We've done that in the past. Or we ask for a new recommendation, and then they go and say yes or no to that. But I can tell you, if we say yes, it's a blind eye. It'll be a yes, period, regardless of the presentation of the trailer or otherwise. So if you want to have any impact, now is your chance to have some sort of voice and impact.
If you deny this, that's what goes to the council. That's it. We move your denial. That was your recommendation to the council, not to amend for the second time the development agreement. That's the recommendation you make today. That goes to the city council. That's it. Then they take your recommendation, and then they hear the item again, considering your recommendation of denial, and they make their decision.
Yeah, so it'll be the yea or nay on that.
This is
What was the First Amendment that you had mentioned?
there's two. This is the Second Amendment of the development agreement. Yeah.
And they were here
There
about
was a
6
first
months
one.
ago. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
In 2017, August of
Wow.
2017.
We opened it up.
The fire station thing and the 20 million was that long ago?
Yes, sir.
I'm getting old quick. Okay.
Yeah, it is fine.
Yeah. You know, I'm not in favor of denying, I'm in favor of amending. But I think the amending needs to be a formal amendment. Not
we want to write it into the resolution. We can do that way too. No problem.
Okay.
That seems a better route.
I agree with, pardon me?
That seems a better route. Amend it.
Yeah, yeah. So I agree that 10 years is too long. I agree with the 5 years. I think that would be a reasonable halfway point. Would you like to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion, and in 5 years, if they come back, we can do another 5 years if we see that something's moving. You know.
I'll second that one, sure.
Do you want to are we amending the resolution to add the 5-year language in there somewhere, like section 4?
Would be section.
It would be to delete and or replace the 10-year extension with the term of 5 years.
Yeah, I was thinking that in section 4, you can say that you're recommending approval of the amendment to the development agreement as outlined in Exhibit A, except that,
Except that.
you know, that
I'm
the
lost.
amendment should be for 5 years.
Where are you?
Right here.
Section 4 of the
Page
resolution.
7.
Page 7.
Right
Page
here,
7,
Steve.
I'm sorry, agenda page 7,
Okay.
section 4.
Add the language there.
So where does it say we're deleting?
After Exhibit A,
Instead
we
of
put a
10 years, a
comma,
period
and then
of
we
5
say,
years.
except that the amendment should
That's-
be, for a term no longer than 5 years, or something like
I'm
that.
sorry. Would it just be easier on section 1 on what is it? E to say extend the development for 5 years.
There you go.
Yeah.
Would that be easier?
10 years.
Yeah. Yes.
This is reflecting what the city and the current owners want, right? They want 10 years. So that's accurate. That's what they want. But so I was thinking that in the section 3, we'd put what you are recommending.
Oh, wait a minute. This is no different than any other applicant coming before us, and we've made modifications to the resolutions and the findings in each and every one section.
Yeah.
And here now we're accepting what they want, and then we're saying, but wait, let's consider this. Again, it's doublespeak. You know, that's not the way we've done this in the past. Why are we changing this
Okay,
now?
so let's just delete it. Let's just, so it doesn't create any confusion, let's just delete it.
Or as the Vice Chairman said, on E, instead of 10, make it 5. Simple, it's spelled out, 5. And that goes for council. Someone wants to argue it differently, let them argue. But the recognition from this body is 5.
I think it's style at this point.
Okay.
So it goes at the
All right,
end or it goes.
that's fine.
You're achieving the same goal. It's just style.
I think it muddies the waters. It doesn't make it very clear, but if that's what you want, we will change that 10-year reference there to 5.
Well, just to be clear.
We'll ask, and then we'll add my amendment as well.
Sure, but just to be clear, is what I hear, what the chairman's asking, is that we do not make the change to subsection E. We insert text at the end of section 4. Is that correct?
That's what
No.
Counselor wants. I was saying it's be cleaner, just amend E.
Oh,
Don't
okay.
add the text
Okay, I see.
at section 4, just change the 10.
No, I
In
wouldn't
section
recommend that.
1E.
I think you need to do both.
Okay.
I would
be okay
change
with
it to
both?
5 years. I change E to 5 years, and then section 4, I put except that the amendment should be for a term no longer than 5 years, so that is clear that is your recommendation. that's the piece that
Okay.
you're recommending.
Okay. What do you think?
It's unnecessary. But
Okay.
you
You okay
raise
with
it more
Okay.
difficult on the floor, but it's the same.
Okay, so with that amendment on the resolution, then there would be a motion to accept adopt the resolution as amended.
So can we just read that then as it will read formally, please?
In the section 1 of the resolution, subsection E, that sentence will read, "The city and former and current owners now wish to extend the development agreement for 5 years." And then you jump over to section 4 of the resolution, and it'll read, "Based upon the findings set forth in sections 1 through 3 of this resolution, the Planning Commission of the City of Downey hereby recommends that the City Council of the City of Downey approve the amendments to the development agreement which are outlined in Exhibit A, except that the amendment should be for a term no longer than 5 years, period."
So, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I don't pretend to be one, and I respect you immensely, but can you tell me why we have the exception when it's already written in section 1E?
Because section 4 is a recital of your recommendation.
Okay.
And you're recommending the amendment, but you're subject to this change in the term, which is 5 years, and it's only so that there's consistency, internal consistency with this document. That's all.
Make sense to you?
I mean, look, this is just my recommendation. If you don't want to add that language, that's perfectly fine. That's Planning Commission discretion. But that is my recommendation.
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion. Any further discussion on this motion? Can we vote?
No, I second it, yeah.
Okay. The motion passes. It was moved by Commissioner Spathopoulos, seconded by Commissioner Owens, and passed by a vote of 4 in favor and 1 abstaining, Commissioner Frometta abstaining, to adopt Resolution 19-3082 to recommend approval to City Council with recommended amendments.
The action of the Planning Commission will be final unless the matter is brought, appealed to the City Council with appropriate fees run within a specified time, period set forth in the city ordinance.
On this one, there's no appeal rights. It just automatically, your resolution goes automatically to the council.
Okay, I retract that last statement.
Right.
Okay, so we move now to non-agenda public comments. Are there any non-agenda public comments? No, okay. Consent calendar items. Does any commissioner wish to discuss the consent calendar items individually, or is there a motion to accept en bloc?
Motion to accept as is.
Second.
There's a motion. May I have a roll call, please?
The vote is now open. Please place your votes. Okay.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was moved by
I think we
Commissioner.
might have an abstention on the minutes from October 3rd from our new commissioner.
Oh, you know, we got to get
Oh, that's right. We've got
Let's
no
see.
Bears back.
Where is he?
Bears back.
That's
Fermento back.
that one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, there-
That happens when you
Substitute
lose.
his vote for his vote.
Just the one item he'd be abstaining on.
That's fine.
Yeah, Commissioner Spath should abstain.
We're on the consent calendar.
On this one,
Five.
right?
You're,
On the
you're,
minutes?
yeah, you're abstaining on this one right here.
Is that what's up right now?
No.
Oh, that's a calendar?
Yeah, so I think we need to rewind the consent calendar. Is
Okay.
and
All right. Okay. The consent calendar items are before us now. So we have at the discretion of the commission to discuss each consent calendar item individually or to vote to accept en bloc.
I think we should discuss them individually as we have a new commissioner who will be abstaining from consent calendar item number 5.
Very well. Let's talk about approval of the minutes of October 3rd, 2018.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to approve the minutes of October 3rd, 2018. Any discussion? Okay. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Okay, the vote is now open. Place your votes. Okay, the motion was made by Commissioner Owens and seconded by Vice Chairman Duarte and passed by a vote of 4 in favor and Commissioner Spathopoulos abstaining to approve the minutes of the October 3rd, 2018 meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Mary.
Welcome.
The next consent calendar item is PLN-19-000012. We have discussion on that, commissioners? Aldo, did you want to say something about this one in particular? Presentation by David?
No, we don't believe there's a presentation required unless you guys have any questions. If you have any questions on the items, we'll definitely attempt to answer them.
So the alignment there, it's an odd shape of property as well. So you've got the right turn deceleration lane to southbound Lakewood, okay, in front of the bus stop there, and certainly the Marisco's type restaurant that's on the west side of Lakewood Boulevard. Are we going to take that city little parkway that's right there and put it back with the entire parcel so that that parcel shape is a better shape? What's the plan?
Sure. Mary, if I can get the PowerPoint up, I think we might have a slide here. There you go. So there's the, let's see, there we go. So there's the right-of-way right there. And so what's driving that is the redevelopment of that site. We've had a problematic owner at that site for decades. If you've ever gone to Tacos Baja, you've noticed the pavement and the parking that's beat up. We've got numerous code enforcement actions on that site. That was the site of the infamous wet bar, where the only CEP revocation that I've experienced in the city over the last 5 years occurred. And so we have a new development proposal that's going through our entitlement plan review process right now. It's being reviewed by all the multiple agencies. In order to build on that site, they need some of our space. So that little area is owned by the city. That area was previously taken from that owner, and they were compensated at fair market value so that those improvements that Commissioner Owens referred to could be installed and constructed on Imperial Highway. And so we then spoke with our Public Works Department to say, hey, are there any future plans for intersection improvements for Imperial and Lakewood? And they said, yes, there is. Actually, we're thinking of adding additional left-hand turn lanes going east and west on Imperial, and there's a high likelihood that we'll get some turn lane improvements on Lakewood going north and south. And so the entire piece of that property is not available for sale to that site. After discussing it with Public Works, they've taken their portion of that site and said the remaining portion of that site could now be sold to the developer. So there's approximately 4,800 square feet of land today in that right-of-way, and 3,500 is square feet is going to be sold to the new property owner. And the matter before you is, will the new use comply with zoning? You're going to have a commercial use in a commercial zone, therefore we believe it applies.
So they're going to extend that to become a parking lot?
No, what they're going to do conceptually, what they've submitted is they're going to scrape the, let's see, do we have, right, I'm sorry, we can see it on this side. They're going to scrape this building, and they're going to build a fast food pad here and reconstruct the parking and the circulation on that site. Conceptually is what they're looking to do, so they need the extra space.
Yeah, because you can't get to that barber, that donut shop, with the Lakewood Boulevard address. You can't park on Lakewood because of the 3 lanes, of through travel. That's a great plan.
So just to be clear, and this kind of goes back to the challenge that we experienced with the development agreement concept. We're not here to talk about what that future development is. What we're here to talk about is that the sale is going to comply with the future use, which complies with the zoning. You have a commercial use in a commercial zone, therefore it's staff's opinion that it complies.
Very succinctly said, sir. Okay. Do I have a motion from any commissioner on this item?
I motion to approve PLN -19 discussed.
Second.
First and second, may I have a vote?
Okay, vote is open. Place your votes. It was moved by Commissioner Owens, seconded by Vice Chairman Duarte, and passed by a vote of 5 in favor to approve PLN 19-00012 General Plan Consistency.
Thank you, Marie. Moving along to other business, does any commissioner have any new business or any business to discuss? Commissioner Spathos. Commissioner Fermetta.
I just had a question if there was an update to the concern that I brought up last meeting in regards to the hookah lounge and the lighting around the window display.
Yes, that is a complaint, so we filed that complaint with our code enforcement officers, and the next day they went out and communicated our concern with the business owner and property owner through a notice of violation.
Thank you.
Commissioner Owens?
Yes, I'd like to thank city staff for following up with me and the rest of the commissioners in regards to the concern of the microwave dish on the top of the historic McDonald's. I think, has it been moved or it's in progress to be moved? So
been moved.
Thank you very much for your attention to that matter. And additionally, thank staff for dealing with, again, my interest, which was brought up, in a prior commission meeting about the stop bar at the new Starbucks as you are exiting out of the drive-through queue onto eastbound Florence. You should be warned to stop before you just roll into the driveway, maybe potentially into oncoming traffic. So that was addressed as well. Thank you very much.
Is that completed?
No, it's not completed. We're in discussions with Starbucks to get that completed.
Put some yellow paint down or something.
Yep. That's the goal, is to slap something down. Yeah, keep it simple.
Okay. Vice Chairman Duarte?
My only comments is we have our conference coming up for the commissioners. So I know we have a new commissioner here. I'd like to encourage you to come out. Sign up if you can. We went about 2 years ago. That was pretty invaluable in the sense that you really kind of got to know each other, and we met so many other commissioners throughout the state, got some ideas from them, but it just kind of grew some some goodwill between us in the sense that now I think it made it easier to speak freely at these meetings, knowing that we knew each other a lot better. Nobody took anything personal, and it's a great seminar. So for those who haven't signed up, I know right now it's the chair and I. last time we spoke. I really and Owens and Mr. Fermetta coming out, so a little peer pressure here, but
Ooh, pressure's on.
I would say it's a really good time in terms of
Local too.
yeah, it's local too.
Actually, everybody's been registered.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
And the dates
Very
again,
good.
one more time? March.
I believe it's March 6th through 8th.
Yeah.
It's 3 days.
All right,
Okay.
well, perfect.
And again, just to repeat that the objective for this year is to make this an educational year. So clearly we went through some exercises today with a formal presentation and a very informal discussion on, policy procedure, I guess. Perhaps that should be a topic that we can talk about, how to deal with these different items as they come up and how there may be alternative methodologies depending on the situations. But I think that we should probably all think about what we did here today and think about how we can represent the city residents in our own venue here and how we may need further education, elucidation of certain roles and procedures, and make that a topic for staff to present to us. This should be a situation where we're all growing professionally here and personally in our esteemed roles. So I personally would welcome reiteration of some facts and some situations, and maybe even a role play scenario or a study session of some sort in order to get through some of these things, especially for the younger members and certainly for myself. I've only been here 2 years. But there's a lot of what I see as consistencies and inconsistencies based on different presentations. We can sort of say which way do we segue and why, and what are the ramifications both in favor or what are the risks for us. I think it would be very, very helpful. Any other business? Comments from Aldo, David?
Yes. Well, let me know when you're at staff member comments.
Staff member comments.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Dominguez. I just wanted to bring to your attention, as we've mentioned on several occasions, staff received a grant from Metro to conduct a specific plan analysis for the future light rail station that is going to be slated for the southern portion of the Rancho Los Amigos property off of Gardendale. We are going through the environmental study process, and we're going to have a community meeting I believe, 4th Monday of February. And so we'll be getting information out shortly to the community and to the planning commissioners as well. We're going to do a complete deep dive into social media and utilize all the city and community resources to invite people out there. We had a meeting on this topic a little over a year ago and had, I believe, 127 people attend. And so we're looking forward to attract that many people to the next meeting.
Very good. Okay. We now move to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We take a vote on the adjournment.
We are adjourned.
Okay.